The summer sun bore down mercilessly on the McAllister ranch, turning the earth into a network of deep cracks that spider-webbed across the barren ground. Dust devils danced in the distance, swirling columns of dirt that rose and fell like ghosts across the desolate landscape. The wind carried with it the scent of dried sage and the promise of another rainless day. Elizabeth McAllister stood on the wraparound porch of the main house, her black morning dress a stark contrast against the weathered wood. The fabric, heavy wool despite the heat, clung to her frame, a daily penance she imposed upon herself. It had been 6 months since Thomas's death, 6 months of wearing black, 6 months of keeping the ranch running while the whole county watched and whispered. She was 28, though the mirror lately showed lines that belonged to a woman 10 years older. Her auburn hair, once worn loose and free, was now pulled back in a severe bun, not a strand out of place. Everything about her appearance spoke of control, of propriety, of a widow maintaining her husband's legacy with unwavering dedication. "Mrs. McAllister," called out Jake Brennan, the aging foreman, approaching from the barn. "The new hands here, looking for work like you asked about." Elizabeth nodded, her gray eyes scanning the horizon before settling on the figure walking beside Jake. The stranger was tall, lean in the way of men who'd spent more nights under stars than roofs. His clothes were worn but clean, his hat pulled low against the sun. When he removed it as he approached the porch, she saw sandy brown hair and eyes the color of winter sky, sad eyes that had seen too much. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and respectful. "Name's Luke Callahan. Heard in town you might be hiring." Elizabeth studied him for a long moment. There was something in his bearing, a quiet dignity despite his obvious need for work. His hands, she noticed, were calloused but gentle as they held his hat. A horseman's hands. "Experience?" she asked, her voice carrying the authority she'd learned to wield these past months. "Worked cattle drives from Texas to Kansas. No horses, fencing, whatever needs doing." He met her gaze directly, neither aggressive nor subservient. "I'm not looking for trouble, just honest work." The townspeople had been full of advice about hiring help. "A young widow needs to be careful," they'd said, their eyes full of judgment disguised as concern. "People will talk, as if they weren't already talking, as if their whispers didn't follow her through the general store, the church, everywhere she went. Jake will show you the bunkhouse." Elizabeth finally said, "We start at dawn. The pay is fair, meals included. We run a respectable operation here. Mr. Callahan, I expect the same from my hands." "Yes, ma'am. You'll have no complaints from me." As the two men walked away, Elizabeth caught herself watching Luke's retreating form. There was a grace to his movement, a man comfortable in his own skin despite whatever had brought him to her door seeking work. She shook her head, annoyed at herself, and turned back into the house. The interior was cool and dark, heavy curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. Everything remained exactly as Thomas had left it, his pipe still on the mantel, his books arranged just so on the shelves. She moved through the rooms like a ghost herself, maintaining his shrine while the weight of secrets pressed against her chest like a physical thing. In town, she knew what they said. Some pitied her. Poor Elizabeth, so young to be widowed. Others suspected. Mighty convenient, him dying just when cattle prices went up. And then there were those who wondered about her past. Where did Thomas find her anyway? Back east, he said, but where exactly? She sank into Thomas's leather chair, the one she'd never sat in while he lived. From her pocket, she withdrew a small silver locket, its surface worn smooth from her fingers. Inside was not a picture but a lock of hair, not Thomas's blonde strands, but dark hair from another life, another person she used to be. The ranch consumed her days. There were accounts to manage, cattle to move, decisions about water rights and grazing lands. She'd learned quickly, driven by necessity and the knowledge that any sign of weakness would bring the circling wolves closer. Tom Morrison from the bank had already paid 3 visits, each time suggesting she might be happier selling, each time his eyes lingering too long on her figure. as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Elizabeth made her rounds. The horses needed checking, and she'd learned never to delegate everything. Trust, but verify, one of Thomas's lessons that served her well. She found Luke in the corral, working with a young mare that had been giving the other hands trouble. He moved slowly, speaking in low tones she couldn't make out. The horse, nervous and skittish, gradually calmed under his patient attention. There was no force, no dominance, just quiet understanding between man and animal. "She's been difficult," Elizabeth said, approaching the fence. Luke glanced up, surprised. Most employers didn't venture out after giving orders. "She's scared, not mean. Someone rushed her training, pushed too hard too fast." His hand stroked the mare's neck. "Just need someone to show her not all humans are in a hurry to break her." The words hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than talk of horses. Elizabeth gripped the fence rail, knuckles white beneath her black gloves. "See that she's properly trained, then," she said, her voice steadier than her hands. "Gentle horses bring better prices." "Yes, ma'am." She turned to go, then paused. "Mr. Callahan, you'll take your meals with the other hands in the cookhouse. Maria serves at 6 sharp. Actually, ma'am, if it's all the same, I prefer to eat alone. Got used to my own company on the trail." Elizabeth studied him again, this solitary man with sad eyes who gentled horses and sought solitude. "As you wish. Maria will set aside a plate." The following days fell into a rhythm. Luke proved as good as his word, working dawn to dusk without complaint, handling the most difficult tasks without being asked. The other hands respected him but kept their distance, sensing perhaps what Elizabeth sensed, that he carried his own shadows. It was on a Tuesday, the heat particularly brutal. When things shifted, Elizabeth had ridden out to check the eastern boundary where Jake had reported fence damage. The sun climbed higher, and her black dress became a furnace. She dismissed Jake's suggestion to take someone with her. "I'm perfectly capable of checking a fence line." "Pride," Thomas would have said, "goes before a fall." The rattlesnake spooked her mare just as they navigated a rocky descent. The horse reared, twisted, and Elizabeth felt herself flying, the ground rushing up fast. She hit hard, the breath knocked from her lungs, her ankle twisting beneath her. The mare bolted, leaving her alone with the sun beating down and pain shooting up her leg. She tried to stand, gasped, and sank back down. The ranch was 3 miles behind her, the damaged fence still a mile ahead. No one expected her back for hours. She'd begun to crawl toward the meager shade of a mesquite tree when she heard hoofbeats. Luke appeared over the rise like a mirage, spurring his mount forward when he spotted her. "Don't move," he said, dismounting in one smooth motion. His hands were gentle as they examined her ankle, professional and impersonal, almost. Sprained, not broken. He diagnosed, "Can you ride?" "I can manage," she said through gritted teeth. "No shame in accepting help," he said quietly, already lifting her as if she weighed nothing. The impropriety of it, his arms around her, her body pressed against his chest, should have concerned her more than it did. He settled her on his horse, then swung up behind her, his arm secure around her waist. "Hold on, Mrs. McAllister." The ride back was torture of a different kind. Each movement sent pain through her ankle. Yes, but worse was the solid warmth of him behind her, the steady heartbeat she could feel through his shirt. She hadn't been held by anyone since Thomas, hadn't realized how starved she was for simple human contact. "How did you know where to find me?" she asked, needing conversation to distract from his proximity. "Saw you ride out." When Jake mentioned the fence location, I thought, he paused. "I thought someone should keep an eye. These lands can be unforgiving." "And you just happen to be free to follow?" "I make time for things that matter." The words sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. She stiffened, and his arm tightened slightly, steadying her. At the ranch, he carried her into the house despite her protests. Setting her gently on the settee, Maria, the cook, bustled in with cold water and bandages, clucking like a worried hen. "I can manage from here." Elizabeth said firmly. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I'll see to your mare. She'll find her way back, but best to be sure." When he left, Maria raised an eyebrow. "That one. He watches you when he thinks no one sees." "Maria," Elizabeth warned. "I say nothing, Senora." "But a woman has eyes." "No?" That night, Elizabeth sat before her fireplace despite the heat, the flames dancing like the questions in her mind. She fingered the locket again, remembering another life, another woman who'd trusted too easily, loved too freely, paid too dearly. The next morning brought a dust cloud on the horizon. A lone rider approached, moving with the easy confidence of a man who belonged wherever he chose to be. Elizabeth watched from the porch, her ankle propped and wrapped, as the figure resolved into a man in his 30s. Dark-haired, well-dressed despite the trail dust. He dismounted at the porch steps, removing his hat to reveal striking green eyes and a face that belonged in a portrait, too handsome, too knowing. "Mrs. McAllister?" His voice carried traces of education, of cities far from here. "Jesse Vance, I was a friend of your husband's. I've just learned of his passing. My deepest condolences." Elizabeth's blood chilled. Thomas had mentioned Jesse exactly twice, both times when drink had loosened his tongue. His oldest friend. He'd said, his wildest friend. The one who'd chosen guns over cattle, danger over domesticity. "Mr. Vance," she managed. "Thomas spoke of you. Did he?" A smile played at his lips, not quite reaching his eyes. "All good things. I hope. May I come in? I've ridden a long way to pay my respects." She could hardly refuse. The laws of hospitality demanded she welcome her late husband's friend. But as Jesse Vance crossed her threshold, Elizabeth felt the carefully constructed world she'd built beginning to shift beneath her feet. In the bunkhouse, Luke Callahan watched the stranger's arrival through a dusty window. He'd seen men like this before, men who carried trouble as naturally as they wore their guns. His hand moved instinctively to his own rifle before he caught himself. Not his business, not his place. He was just a hired hand on the McAllister ranch. But as he watched Elizabeth receive the visitor, saw the tension in her shoulders and the way her hand gripped the porch rail, Luke knew he was fooling himself. Everything about Elizabeth McAllister was becoming his business, whether he had the right or not. Jesse Vance settled into Thomas's leather chair as if he'd always belonged there, his green eyes taking in every detail of the room. Elizabeth sat across from him, back rigid, hands folded in her lap, the picture of a proper widow save for the wariness in her eyes. "Thomas always did have fine taste," Jesse said, gesturing to the room's appointments. "In all things." His gaze lingered on her a moment too long. "You said you were traveling," Elizabeth prompted, desperate to fill the silence. "Where from?" "Most recently, El Paso. Before that, Tombstone. Before that," he shrugged elegantly. "Wherever the wind and work took me." "And what work is that, Mr. Vance?" His smile was sharp as a blade. "Protection, security. Sometimes men need someone who's good with a gun to stand between them and trouble. A gunfighter." She didn't try to hide her disapproval. Such an ugly word. "I prefer to think of myself as a problem solver." He leaned forward. "But I didn't come here to talk about my profession, Mrs. McAllister. I came because Thomas Byron was the best friend I ever had, and I find it mighty strange that he's dead from falling off a horse." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Elizabeth's hand moved unconsciously to her throat. "Accidents happen, Mr. Vance, even to experienced horsemen." "That's just it," Jesse said, standing to pace the room. "Tom could ride before he could walk. His father put him on a horse at 3 years old. I've seen him ride drunk, injured, through blizzards and dust storms. The man was half centaur." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. Tom Byron didn't fall off horses. Horses fell under him, maybe, but never the other way around." Elizabeth rose despite her injured ankle. "If you're implying something untoward about my husband's death, I'm implying nothing about you, Mrs. McAllister. His voice gentled. Tom wrote me about you, said he'd found himself a real lady back east, someone who brought class to this rough country. He was happy, happier than I'd ever known him. The unexpected kindness nearly undid her. She sank back into her chair, fighting tears she hadn't allowed herself since the funeral. He was a good man, the best, Jessie agreed, which is why I need to understand what happened. Not for any legal purpose, just for my own peace of mind. She told him what she'd told everyone. How Thomas had ridden out to check the north pasture. How his horse had returned riderless. How they'd found him at the base of Sawyer's Ridge with his neck broken. Jessie listened without interrupting, then asked, was he having trouble with anyone? Disputes over water rights, land boundaries, anything? No more than any rancher, Mr. Morrison at the bank had been pressuring him to sell, but Thomas laughed it off. Tom Morrison. Jessie's eyes narrowed. Still trying to build his empire? Is he? You know him? We've crossed paths. He's the kind of man who thinks everything's for sale if you apply enough pressure. He studied her. Has he been pressuring you since Thomas died? Elizabeth's silence was answer enough. I see. Jessie moved to the window, watching the ranch hands work, his gaze fixed on something, or someone. That new hand of yours, Callahan? Yes, he's been here about a week. Interesting timing. He's a good worker, Elizabeth said defensively, surprising herself. The best I've hired? Jessie turned back to her, eyebrow raised. I'm sure he is. Still, might be worth knowing where he came from, what brought him here. I could say the same about you, Mr. Vance. He laughed, a rich sound that transformed his face. Touches, Mrs. McAllister. You're right, of course. We're all running from something out here. And what are you running from? Who says I'm running? Maybe I'm chasing. He moved closer, and she caught the scent of leather and gunpowder. Tom asked me to look after you if anything happened, made me promise. I don't need looking after. No, he agreed, surprising her again. I can see that. You're stronger than you appear. But this is hard country for a woman alone, especially one with property worth killing for. The word killing sent a chill through her. You really think? I think Tom deserves to have his death properly examined. I'd like to stay on for a few weeks. If you'll have me, I can work. I'm not asking for charity. Despite my current profession, I know cattle. Tom and I worked plenty of drives in our younger days. Elizabeth hesitated. Another man on the ranch, especially one with Jessie's dangerous air, would set tongues wagging. But if Thomas had truly been murdered, there's a room above the barn. It's clean, but basic. I've slept in worse places. Thank you, Mrs. McAllister. He started for the door, then paused. One more thing. Tom ever mention anything about your past? Where exactly back east you came from? Her heart stopped. Why would that matter? No reason, just that Tom was never one for mysteries, but he was mighty vague about how you two met. His eyes were too knowing. Makes a man wonder is all. After he left, Elizabeth collapsed in her chair, shaking. How much had Thomas really told his friend? How much did Jessie already know or suspect? Outside, Luke watched the stranger emerge from the main house. Everything about the man screamed danger. From the tied-down holster to the predator's grace. Their eyes met across the yard, holding for a long moment of mutual assessment. Jessie touched his hat brim in mock salute and sauntered toward the barn. Luke's jaw tightened. Trouble had just ridden onto the McAllister ranch, wearing an expensive suit and a killer's smile. The next days were tense with unspoken rivalries. Jessie integrated himself into ranch life with surprising ease, his natural charm winning over most of the hands. He told stories around the evening fire, tales of adventure that had the younger men hanging on every word. But he also watched. Luke noticed how Jessie's eyes tracked Elizabeth's movements, how he appeared wherever she happened to be working, checking fences when she rode out, offering to help with the accounts, finding excuses to visit the main house. Luke kept his distance, did his work, and tried not to notice how Elizabeth's cheeks flushed when Jessie made her laugh, or how she'd started wearing her hair a little looser. It was none of his business. He'd learned long ago that wanting things beyond your reach only led to pain. The storm came out of nowhere on a Thursday evening. The sky went from clear to black in minutes, rain falling in sheets that turned the ground to mud. Luke was in the barn, settling the horses who sensed the weather's fury. When he heard the cry, Elizabeth was trapped in the cattle pen, trying to guide the panicked animals to shelter. The rain had turned her black dress into a sodden weight, and she slipped in the mud, going down hard. Luke didn't think. He vaulted the fence, reaching her just as a steer's horn passed inches from her head. He pulled her against him, using his body as a shield while he guided them both to safety. They tumbled into the feed shed, gasping. Elizabeth was shaking. Whether from cold or fear, he couldn't tell. Without thought, he stripped off his jacket, wrapping it around her shoulders. "You could have been killed," he said roughly. "The cattle can take care of themselves. You can't." His hands gripped her shoulders. "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking about my livelihood," she shot back, but her voice trembled. "Those cattle are all I have." "No," he said quietly. "They're not." The air between them shifted, charged with more than storm electricity. Elizabeth looked up at him, rain dripping from her lashes, and Luke saw the moment her walls cracked. Her hand came up to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat race beneath her palm. "Luke," she whispered, and hearing his given name on her lips broke the last of his restraint. He kissed her with all the desperate longing he'd tried to bury, and she responded with equal fervor. The storm raged outside, but here in this small shelter, there was only warmth and need and the taste of rain on their lips. When they finally broke apart, reality crashed back. Elizabeth stepped away, hand pressed to her mouth. "We can't. I can't. Elizabeth, no." She fumbled for the door. "This was a mistake. You work for me. I'm a widow." I don't give a damn what people would say." "Well, I have to." The words came out sharp with pain. "You don't understand. My reputation is all that stands between me and ruin. One whisper of impropriety and everything Thomas built, everything I've fought to maintain. I would never hurt you. You already are," she said quietly, and fled into the storm. Luke stood alone in the shed, fists clenched, wanting to punch something. He'd broken his own rules, let himself care, let himself hope. Fool. When he finally returned to the bunkhouse, Jessie was waiting on the porch, smoking a cigar despite the rain. "Heroic rescue," Jessie observed. "Very timely. The cattle were stampeding." "Of course they were." Jessie blew a smoke ring. "Word of advice, friend. Elizabeth McAllister is not for the likes of us. She's quality, real Eastern society type. You're just setting yourself up for heartbreak." "Speaking from experience?" Jessie's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I knew her husband. He told me enough to know she's used to finer things than a cowhand can provide. Maybe she's tired of fine things. Maybe." Jessie flicked his cigar into the rain. "Or maybe she's just lonely and grateful. Either way, it won't last. Women like her. They need security, status, things a drifter can't offer." Luke pushed past him without responding, but Jessie's words echoed in his mind. What did he really know about Elizabeth? What could he offer beyond strong hands and a heart that was already half hers? Inside the main house, Elizabeth stood at her bedroom window, watching the two men's confrontation through the rain-blurred glass. Her lips still tingled from Luke's kiss. Her body still hummed with awakening desire. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass. What was she doing? She'd built these walls so carefully, brick by brick, to protect the secret that could destroy her. And now, with one kiss, Luke threatened to bring them all tumbling down. But God help her, she wanted him to. Jessie's arrival had stirred memories she'd rather forget, of the life before Thomas, of the man Thomas had been before they'd married. He'd saved her. Yes, but he'd also owned her in his way. Their marriage had been fond but passionless, a business arrangement dressed up as romance. With Luke, she glimpsed something different, something real and raw and terrifying in its intensity. A knock at her door made her jump. Maria entered with a tea tray, her knowing eyes taking in Elizabeth's disheveled state. "The men, they are both worried for you," Maria said carefully. "See our Jesse. He asks if you need anything. See our Luke. He paces like a caged wolf. Tell them both I'm fine. I'm retiring early." Maria set down the tray. "See Aura. Forgive me, but I have worked for this family many years. I know when a woman's heart is at war with her head. My heart has nothing to do with anything." "No." Maria moved to the door. "Then why do you watch one man while you speak to the other? Why does your face come alive when the quiet one is near?" "Maria, I say only this. Life is short in this hard land. Tomorrow is promised to no one. Sir Thomas, he knew this, is why he brought you here, gave you new life. Don't waste it on fear." After Maria left, Elizabeth retrieved her hidden box from beneath loose floorboards. Inside were documents that could destroy her, a marriage certificate from Kansas City, but not to Thomas Byron, photos from a different life, a different woman who'd believed in love until it betrayed her. She'd been so young, so naive, thought herself in love with a charming man who'd promised her the world. Instead, he'd sold her innocence to the highest bidder, trapped her in a hell she'd barely escaped. Thomas had been her salvation, finding her broken and desperate, offering marriage and a new start far from those who'd known her shame. He'd been kind in his way, never demanding more than she could give, content with a beautiful wife who ran his home and warmed his bed without passion. But Luke stirred things she'd thought dead, made her want things she'd believed herself incapable of feeling. And Jesse? Jesse reminded her too much of her first husband, charming, dangerous, with secrets behind his smile. He was asking questions, probing into Thomas's death but also into her past. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she would send them both away. Better to be alone than to risk everything. But as thunder shook the house and rain lashed the windows, Elizabeth knew she was lying to herself. The storm had already begun, and there would be no shelter from what was coming. In the barn loft, Jesse Vance lay awake on his borrowed bed, listening to the storm and thinking about puzzles. Thomas's death was one puzzle. His mysterious widow was another. He'd recognized something in her the moment they'd met. A woman wearing a mask so carefully crafted it had become second nature. It took one to know one. After all, the question was, what lay beneath that mask? And how far would she go to keep it hidden? And more interesting still, what would the lovesick cowhand do when he learned the truth about the woman he was falling for? Jesse smiled in the darkness. He'd come here seeking answers about his friend's death, but the game unfolding before him promised to be far more entertaining than a simple murder investigation. The storm passed near dawn, leaving the ranch washed clean and sparkling under the rising sun. But for the three souls caught in this growing web of desire and deception, the real tempest was only beginning. The morning after the storm, Elizabeth moved through her routines like a sleepwalker. She avoided the barn, the corrals, anywhere she might encounter Luke. The memory of his kiss burned like a brand, making her hands shake as she poured her coffee. Jesse appeared at her kitchen door, hat in hand. "Mrs. McAllister, might I have a word?" She couldn't refuse without seeming rude. He entered, filling the space with his presence, those green eyes missing nothing. Not her pallor, not the shadows beneath her eyes, not the way her fingers worried at her wedding ring. "I'm riding into town this morning," he said. "Thought I'd ask if you needed anything." "That's kind, but no. I also thought I might visit with Sheriff Watson, see what investigation was done into Thomas's death." Elizabeth's cup rattled against its saucer. "I told you, it was ruled an accident. Rulings can be wrong." He moved closer, voice gentle. "Elizabeth, may I call you that? I know this is difficult, but if someone harmed Thomas, don't you want to know? What I want is to be left in peace. Peace built on lies is no peace at all." The words cut too close. She stood abruptly, Thank you for your concern, Mr. Vance, but I have work to do. He studied her for a long moment. Very well. But Elizabeth, whatever you're hiding, it won't stay buried forever. Secrets have a way of clawing their way to the surface. After he left, Elizabeth sank back into her chair. He knew, somehow, he knew she was hiding something. The question was how much, and what he intended to do about it. She needed guidance, needed someone to tell her she wasn't the fallen woman her past proclaimed. Despite the early hour, she saddled her mare and rode toward town, toward the only sanctuary she'd known since arriving here. The church sat on the edge of Cedar Falls, its white steeple reaching toward heaven like an accusation. Father Miguel was tending the small garden beside the sanctuary, his weathered hands gentle on the roses that somehow thrived in this harsh climate. Mrs. McAllister. He greeted her warmly. You're out early. Father, I need to speak with you. His expression grew concerned. Of course, child, come. The confessional was dim and cool, smelling of old wood and candle wax. Elizabeth knelt, her words coming in fits and starts. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. It has been 1 week since my last confession, and I have harbored impure thoughts. I have allowed a man who is not my husband to touch me. Your husband has passed. Child, you are free to seek companionship again. In time. No, Father, you don't understand. The words tumbled out faster now. I am not who people think I am. Before I married Thomas, I lived a life of sin. In Kansas City, She couldn't say the words, but Father Miguel was old and had heard many confessions. He understood. How old were you when this life began? 14. Her voice was barely a whisper. My father died, and my mother. She was ill. A man promised to help us, to take care of us. Instead, he sold my virtue to pay our debts, and when that wasn't enough, he put me in a house, a fancy one, for wealthy men, but still. You were a child, Father Miguel said firmly. Taken advantage of by those who should have protected you. This is not your sin to carry. But I stayed. For 2 years, I stayed, until I met Thomas at a party. He was visiting the city on business. He was kind to me, spoke to me like I was a real person. When he offered to take me away, to marry me and give me a new life, I lied to him, told him I was an orphan from a good family fallen on hard times. He never knew what I really was. And now there are 2 men at the ranch. One looks at me like I'm something precious. The other, I think he suspects the truth. And I'm so tired of hiding. Father, so tired of pretending to be the respectable widow, when inside I feel like that scared girl in Kansas City. My child. Father Miguel's voice was gentle. God's forgiveness is infinite. But you must also forgive yourself. What happened to you was not your choice. You survived. That is not sin. That is strength. The world wouldn't see it that way. Then perhaps the world needs its vision corrected. As for these men, be cautious, but do not close your heart entirely. You deserve love, true love, regardless of your past. Elizabeth left the church feeling marginally lighter, but as she rode back through town, she noticed the stares, the whispers. Jesse's presence at the ranch had already set tongues wagging. At Morton's general store, she stopped for supplies. Tom Morrison emerged from the bank next door, his broad face lighting up with false pleasure. Mrs. McAllister, how fortunate. I was planning to ride out to see you. Mr. Morrison, she acknowledged coolly. I hear you've taken on new hands. That's good, very good. Though it must be expensive, maintaining such a large operation. We're managing fine. Of course, of course. Still, my offer stands. Very generous terms. Enough to set you up comfortably back east. A woman like you shouldn't have to worry about cattle and accounts. A woman like me. Her voice carried a warning he chose to ignore. Refined, delicate, meant for society, not this rough country. His hand touched her elbow. possessive. I could take care of you, Elizabeth. You wouldn't have to be alone. She stepped away. I'm not alone, Mr. Morrison, and I'm not interested in your offer or your protection. Good day. His face darkened. You might want to reconsider. This territory can be dangerous for a woman without proper protection. Accidents happen. The blood drained from her face. Is that a threat? An observation. Your husband learned that the hard way? She left quickly, hands trembling on the reins. Morrison's words echoed Jessie's suspicions. Had Thomas been murdered for refusing to sell? And if so, was she next? Back at the ranch, she found Luke working with the horses. He looked up as she approached, his expression carefully neutral, but she caught the flash of hurt in his eyes. Mrs. McAllister. Luke, about last night. You made yourself clear. It won't happen again. I need you to understand. I understand plenty. He turned back to the horses. You've got your position to think of. I've got mine. Best we both remember that. The coldness in his voice cut deep, but before she could respond, Jesse appeared leading his horse. Interesting trip to town, he announced. Sheriff Watson was surprisingly unhelpful about Thomas's death, almost like someone didn't want too many questions asked. Or perhaps there simply wasn't anything to find. Elizabeth said, Perhaps. Jesse's gaze flicked between her and Luke. Though I did learn something interesting. Tom Morrison's been buying up land all around the county. Yours is the last major ranch he doesn't control. A man like that might do anything to complete his empire. Luke's head snapped up. You think Morrison killed Mr. Byron? I think it's worth investigating. Jesse's smile was sharp. Unless someone has a reason to let sleeping dogs lie. Elizabeth felt both men watching her, waiting. She lifted her chin. Do what you think best. Mr. Vance, I have nothing to hide. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. That evening, she couldn't stand the walls closing in. She walked out to the small cemetery on the hill where Thomas lay beneath a simple stone. The sunset painted the sky in shades of blood and gold. I'm trying. Thomas, she whispered. I'm trying to be the woman you thought I was, but I'm so tired of pretending. She didn't hear the footsteps until Jesse spoke behind her. He loved you, you know, truly. She whirled, heart racing. How long have you been there? Long enough. He moved to stand beside her, looking down at his friend's grave. Tom wrote me about you. Said he'd found a rare jewel in Kansas City, a woman of quality who'd agreed to share his life. He was happier than I'd ever seen him. Don't. Her voice broke. Please don't. Don't what? Tell you that you made his last years joyful? That whatever you were before, you became exactly what he needed. She was crying now, unable to stop. Jesse offered her his handkerchief, his touch gentle as he brushed away her tears. I know, Elizabeth, he said softly. I know what you were in Kansas City. Her knees buckled. He caught her, held her steady. How? I have connections there. When I decided to investigate Thomas's death, I investigated everything. I know about the house on Vine Street. I know about Marcus Wheeler, who ran it. I know you were his special attraction for 2 years before you disappeared. Oh, God. She tried to pull away, but he held her fast. I also know you were 14 when Wheeler got his hooks into you. That your mother was dying and he promised to pay for her care. That you tried to run twice and he had you beaten for it. His voice hardened. If the bastard wasn't already dead, I'd kill him myself. She stared up at him, stunned. You don't despise me? Despise you, Christ, woman. You survived hell and came out the other side. You gave my best friend happiness he never thought to find. Why would I despise you? Because I'm ruined, fallen. Everything society says, society can go hang itself. He cupped her face in his hands. You're the strongest woman I've ever met. And if Tom were here, he'd horsewhip me for what I'm about to do. But he kissed her, different from Luke's desperate passion. This was calculated, expert, designed to seduce. For a moment, she responded from old habit, the trained response of a woman who'd learned to please men. Then she wrenched away. "No, I can't. Not again. Elizabeth, I spent 2 years kissing men I didn't want, pretending feelings I didn't have. I won't do it again, not even for kindness." She backed away. "I know you mean well, Jesse, but what I feel for you is gratitude, not desire." "And what you feel for Callahan?" She didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Jesse nodded slowly. "I see. Does he know?" "No, and he can't. Ever. He's a good man, an honorable man. He'd be disgusted. Or maybe he'd surprise you. Maybe he'd see what I see, a woman who deserves love regardless of her past. Men say that until the past becomes real. Then they see only the whore, not the woman. Some men, maybe, but not all." He studied her. "You'll have to tell him eventually. Secrets have a way of coming out, and better from you than someone else." "I can't lose him," she whispered, then realized what she'd admitted. Jesse smiled sadly. "Then you'd better figure out if he's worth the risk. Because living a lie, that's just another kind of prison. Elizabeth, and you've been caged long enough." He left her there as darkness fell, alone with Thomas's ghost and the weight of truth. That night, unable to sleep, she found herself at the barn. Luke was there, as she'd somehow known he would be, working on a broken bridle by lantern light. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. He looked up, wary. "Horse needs this fixed for morning." "Luke, She stopped, gathered courage. "What I said yesterday was cruel. You deserve better." "Do I?" He set down the bridle. "Seems to me you were right. I'm just a hand. You're the boss. Best keep things simple." "Nothing about this is simple." "No?" He stood, moved closer. "Seems simple to me. You feel something. I feel something. But your reputation matters more than what we feel. It's not about reputation. It's about, I'm not who you think I am. Luke, I've done things. Been things that would shock you. We've all got pasts." "Not like mine." He studied her face in the lantern light. "You think you're the only one with secrets? The only one who's done things they regret? What could you possibly have done that compares?" "I killed a man." The words fell between them like stones. "Back in Colorado. He was hurting a woman. Wouldn't stop. I stopped him. Permanently. That's why I drift. That's why I can't go home." Elizabeth stared at him. "You protected someone." "I took a life. Doesn't matter why. Blood doesn't wash off easy." He laughed bitterly. "So don't tell me about shocking pasts. We've all got our ghosts. Luke, the difference is," he continued, "I'm not letting mine dictate my future. Question is, are you?" He moved past her toward the door, then paused. "That kiss yesterday, that was the most alive I've felt in 3 years. You can run from that if you want, Elizabeth, but don't pretend it's for my sake." After he left, Elizabeth stood alone in the barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and leather and possibilities. Tomorrow, she would have to make a choice, keep running from her past, or turn and face it. But tonight, she simply stood in the darkness and let herself feel the fear, the hope, the terrible, wonderful possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could be more than her secrets. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance, and she shivered. The predators were circling, both the four-legged kind and the human variety. Time was running out to decide which battle to fight first, and whether she'd fight it alone, or finally let someone stand beside her. The next morning brought a decision Elizabeth could no longer postpone. She found Luke mending fences at the eastern boundary, his movements efficient despite the early hour. The sunrise painted the landscape in shades of amber and rose, but she barely noticed the beauty. "Luke," he didn't turn. "Mrs. McAllister." "Please." "I need to tell you something. If it's more about keeping our distance, it's about why I've been keeping that distance." She took a deep breath. "You shared your truth with me. I owe you mine." Now he turned, wariness and hope warring in his expression. "You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do." She dismounted, needing solid ground beneath her feet for this. "My name is Elizabeth McAllister now, but that's not who I've always been. Before I married Thomas, I was I lived in Kansas City." She told him everything. About her father's death, her mother's illness, Marcus Wheeler's false promises, about the house on Vine Street where wealthy men paid for the company of young women, about the 2 years she'd spent there, surviving the only way she could. Luke's face went through a series of changes, shock, anger, something that might have been pain, but he didn't interrupt, didn't move away. "Thomas found me at a gathering," she continued, voice barely above a whisper. "He was kind. When he offered marriage and a new life here, I took it. I lied about my past, became the respectable Eastern lady he wanted, and now, his voice was rough. Now I'm tired of lying, tired of being afraid. Jesse knows. He investigated. Soon others might know too. You deserve to hear it from me before anything else happened between us." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind through the grass. Elizabeth forced herself to meet his eyes, to see the disgust she knew would be there. Instead, she saw tears. "14, he said finally. "You were 14, old enough to know you were a child." The words came out fierce. A child whose mother was dying, who had no one to protect her. Christ, Elizabeth! He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, pulled her against him. She stood frozen, unable to process this reaction. "Luke, I need to know something," he said into her hair. "This Wheeler, is he dead?" "Yes. 3 years ago." "Good. Saves me the trouble." He pulled back to look at her face. "Is that why you've been holding back? You thought I'd judge you for surviving? Any decent man would—" "Stop." His hands framed her face. "You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see a woman who survived hell and still has kindness in her heart, who runs this ranch with strength and fairness, who took in a drifter with blood on his hands and gave him work without questions. That's different, is it? I chose to kill that man. You didn't choose what happened to you. But the things I did, the men were surviving. Nothing more, nothing less." His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Elizabeth, I've got no right to judge anyone. All I know is that when I'm near you, I can breathe again. When you smile, the world makes sense. Your past doesn't change that." She searched his face for any sign of deception, found only steady sincerity. "You don't think I'm ruined? I think you're the strongest woman I've ever met. And if you'll let me, I'd like to spend whatever time we have proving that to you." The last of her walls crumbled. She reached up, pulled his head down, and kissed him with all the desperate hope in her heart. This time, there was no hesitation, no fear, only the truth of 2 damaged souls finding solace in each other. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Luke rested his forehead against hers. "No more running. No more running," she agreed. They rode back together, a new understanding between them. But as the ranch buildings came into view, Elizabeth saw a cloud of dust on the horizon. Multiple riders, moving fast. "Trouble," Luke said, spurring his horse forward. By the time they reached the yard, Tom Morrison had already dismounted, accompanied by 4 hard-looking men. Jesse stood on the porch, hand resting casually near his gun. "Mrs. McAllister," Morrison boomed. "So good to find you home." "Mr. Morrison, to what do I owe this visit?" "Just being neighborly. Wanted to make sure you'd reconsidered my offer." His eyes were cold despite his smile. "Real estate prices can drop sudden-like out here. Accidents, Indian troubles, all sorts of things can affect value. Is that another threat?" "Just free advice." He gestured to his men. "These boys have been helping me acquire properties throughout the county. Amazing how cooperative folks become when they understand the benefits of selling." Luke had positioned himself slightly behind Elizabeth, ready. She felt the tension radiating from him, matched by Jesse's coiled readiness on the porch. "My answer remains the same," she said clearly. "The McAllister Ranch is not for sale." Morrison's face darkened. "That's unfortunate. See, I've been patient. Let you play at being a rancher, but my patience is wearing thin." "Then perhaps you should leave." "Oh, I'll leave. But first, might interest you to know I had a fascinating conversation with a friend in Kansas City, Marcus Wheeler. You remember him, don't you, before his untimely death? The blood drained from Elizabeth's face. Luke stepped forward, but she caught his arm. Ancient history, Morrison continued. But folks around here might find it real interesting. The widow McAllister's colorful past. Course, if you were to sell, I'd have no reason to share such gossip. You're blackmailing me? Such an ugly word. I prefer to think of it as a business negotiation. He moved closer, and Luke tensed. You've got 1 week to reconsider. After that, well, this town's about to hear some shocking stories about their respectable widow. Get off my land, Elizabeth said, voice steady despite her racing heart. Morrison tipped his hat mockingly. 1 week, Mrs. McAllister. Choose wisely. After they left, Elizabeth sank onto the porch steps. Jessie crouched beside her while Luke paced like a caged wolf. He's bluffing, Jessie said. Wheeler's dead. He can't have talked to him. He doesn't need to. There are others who knew, who worked at the house. Elizabeth's voice was hollow. He has enough to destroy me. Then we destroy him first, Luke said flatly. How? He owns half the county, has the sheriff in his pocket. There are other kinds of justice. Jessie interrupted. I've been doing some digging. Morrison's land acquisitions haven't all been legal. Forged documents, intimidation, even a few suspicious deaths. Man like that has enemies. You're suggesting what exactly? I'm suggesting we fight back. You've been hiding long enough. Elizabeth, time to stand and face this. That night, Elizabeth couldn't sleep. She found herself in Thomas's study, going through his papers. He'd been meticulous about records, and she'd continued the practice. A knock at the door made her jump. Luke entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might need this. She accepted gratefully, their fingers brushing. Even that simple contact sent warmth through her. I've been thinking, he said, about Morrison's threat. Luke, hear me out. What if you don't wait? What if you tell your story first, on your terms? Tell everyone you were a girl who was taken advantage of, who survived, who built a new life through strength and determination. He sat beside her. Take away his weapon by owning your truth. This town would crucify me. Some would. Others might surprise you. Maria, Jake, Father Miguel, they already know you. Do you really think they'd turn on you? It's a terrible risk. So is letting Morrison control you through fear. He took her hand. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. If this town can't see your worth, then we'll find another town. But I won't let you face this alone. The next morning, Elizabeth made her decision. She dressed carefully in her best day dress. Not black, but deep blue that Thomas had always said brought out her eyes. If she was going to face her past, she'd do it as herself, not the grieving widow she'd been playing. Jessie raised an eyebrow when he saw her. Going somewhere special? Church, she said. It's Sunday. The whole town will be there. Understanding dawned in his eyes. You're sure about this? No, but I'm tired of being afraid. Luke appeared, having traded his work clothes for his one good shirt. Mind if I escort you? People will talk. Let them. The 3 of them rode into town together, the widow, the drifter, and the gunfighter. Elizabeth almost laughed at the sight they must make. The church was full, as expected. Conversations died as they entered, every eye following their progress. Elizabeth took her usual pew, Luke beside her, Jessie behind. The service progressed normally until Father Miguel asked if anyone had announcements for the community. Elizabeth stood, heart pounding. I do, Father. Whispers rippled through the congregation as she walked to the front. Tom Morrison sat in the front row, his expression shifting from smug to wary. Many of you have wondered about my past, Elizabeth began, voice carrying clearly, where I came from before marrying Thomas. I've let you wonder because I was ashamed, but I've learned that shame gives others power over us, and I won't live that way anymore. She told them everything, Her father's death, her mother's illness, the trap she'd fallen into. She spoke of surviving 2 years in Kansas City, of meeting Thomas, of the second chance he'd given her. "I don't ask for your approval," she concluded. "I don't need it. I've run the McAllister Ranch honestly and fairly. I've contributed to this community. My past doesn't change that, but I wanted you to hear the truth from me, not from those who would use it as a weapon." The silence was deafening. Then Maria stood up in her pew. "Ciora McAllister has been nothing but good to me and mine. Her past is past. God forgives. So do I." Jake Brennan stood next. "Known plenty of folks with perfect reputations who'd cheat you soon as look at you. Mrs. McAllister's always been square with me." One by one, others stood. Not everyone, but enough. The minister's wife, the school teacher, even crusty old Sam from the livery stable. Morrison's face had turned purple. "You can't be serious. She's a—" "Careful," Jesse said softly, hand resting on his gun. "You finish that sentence. You and I are going to have a problem." "This is ridiculous." Morrison stood. "She admitted it herself. She's not fit to own property, to mix with decent folk." "Neither are you," a new voice said from the back. Sheriff Watson walked down the aisle, a stranger beside him. "Mr. Morrison, this is Federal Marshal Collins. He's been investigating some interesting claims about your land deals." Morrison went white. "This is absurd." "You can't— Got a warrant right here," the marshal said. "Seems several of your sellers want to change their stories now that they've got federal protection, including some real interesting testimony about Thomas Byron's death. You've got no proof. Got enough to hold you while we investigate further." The marshal nodded to Elizabeth. "Ma'am, sorry for your troubles." As Morrison was led away, still protesting, Elizabeth felt her knees go weak. Luke was there instantly, arm around her waist. "It's over," he murmured. "You did it." Outside the church, townspeople approached, some to offer support, others to cut her direct. Elizabeth accepted both with dignity. She'd known there would be consequences, but for the first time in years, she felt free. Jesse tipped his hat. "Well played, though I'm curious how the marshal happened to show up so conveniently." "I may have sent some telegrams," he admitted. "Had a feeling Morrison wouldn't take rejection well. Figured it couldn't hurt to have backup." "Thank you," Elizabeth said softly, "for everything. Thank Tom. He asked me to look after you. Just keeping my promise." He mounted his horse. "I'll be moving on come morning. You don't need me anymore. Will we see you again?" His smile was vintage Jesse, charming and slightly dangerous. "Never know when the wind might blow me back this way. Take care of her, Callahan." Luke nodded. "Count on it." That evening, Elizabeth stood in her kitchen, watching the sunset through the window. The house felt different somehow, lighter, as if the shadows had finally been chased away. Luke came up behind her, arms wrapping around her waist. "Regrets? No, I'm sure there will be difficult days ahead. People who won't forget or forgive, but at least I'm facing them as myself. That's all anyone can do." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'm proud of you." She turned in his arms. "I couldn't have done it without you. Without believing someone could know everything and still love you?" He cupped her face. "Elizabeth, I've been falling for you since the day I arrived. Learning your past just made me admire you more." "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling strange and wonderful on her tongue. He kissed her then, tender and sure, full of promise. When they broke apart, she took his hand. "Stay with me tonight?" Elizabeth, not as employer and hired hand, not as anything but two people who found each other against all odds. She squeezed his hand. "I've spent so many nights alone. Luke, I don't want to be alone anymore." He searched her face, then nodded. "Neither do I." She led him upstairs to the room she'd shared with Thomas. But it didn't feel like betrayal. Thomas had saved her, given her shelter and purpose. But Luke gave her something more, the chance to be truly known and loved despite everything. As moonlight streamed through the windows, they came together with gentle reverence, Luke's hands traced every scar, visible and invisible, with infinite tenderness. Elizabeth let herself be vulnerable in ways she'd never allowed before, trusting him with not just her body but the fractured pieces of her soul. "I've got you," he whispered against her skin. "I've always got you." Later, as they lay entwined, Elizabeth felt something she'd never experienced: complete peace. The morning would bring challenges. There would be those who'd never accept her, business relationships that would suffer, social cuts to endure. But she wouldn't face them alone, and she wouldn't face them as anyone but herself. "What are you thinking?" Luke asked, fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I'm finally home," she said. "Not just in this place, but in my own skin. In this life we're building. We, if you'll have me, the ranch, the judgment, all of it." "Elizabeth Byron McAllister," he said seriously. "I would take you anywhere, under any circumstances, facing any challenge. You're my home now. The rest is just details." She kissed him, pouring all her gratitude and love into the gesture. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance, but it no longer sounded like a threat. It was just another creature surviving in the wild lands, calling to its mate under the vast western sky, just like her. A survivor who'd finally found where she belonged. The revelation of Elizabeth's past rippled through Cedar Falls like a stone dropped in still water. Within days, the town divided into clear camps, those who stood by her and those who turned their backs. The general store suddenly had supply problems filling her orders. The ladies' auxiliary sent a terse note uninviting her from their monthly meetings. Even some of the ranch hands quit, unwilling to work for a woman with such a history. Elizabeth faced each slight with her chin high, but Luke saw the toll it took. He found her one morning staring at the ledgers, shoulders tight with strain. "Bad news. Henderson's pulled his cattle contract. Says he can't do business with someone of questionable character." She laughed bitterly. "That's 3 contracts lost this week." Luke covered her hand with his. "We'll find others." "With what reputation?" "Morrison may be in jail awaiting trial, but his poison is still spreading." She pushed back from the desk. "Maybe I was wrong to tell the truth. Maybe I've destroyed everything Thomas built. You've destroyed nothing. You've just revealed who your real friends are." A commotion outside interrupted them. Jake burst through the door, face flushed. "Mrs. McAllister, riders coming, about a dozen, and they don't look friendly." Elizabeth and Luke rushed to the porch. A group of men approached, led by Carlton Hayes, a neighboring rancher who'd always been cordial to Thomas but cold to her. "Mrs. McAllister," Hayes called out, not bothering to dismount. "We're here representing the Cedar Falls Cattlemen's Association." "Since when do they make house calls?" Elizabeth asked. "Since we voted to revoke your membership. A woman of your background isn't fit to associate with respectable ranchers." Luke stepped forward, but Elizabeth caught his arm. "I see, and I suppose this has nothing to do with the fact that without my water rights, half of you would have to drive your cattle an extra 20 miles to water?" Hayes's face reddened. "This is about moral standards." "This is about greed," Elizabeth interrupted. "You think with me isolated and contracts drying up, I'll be forced to sell. Tell me, Mr. Hayes, have you already discussed with the others how you'll divide my land?" "How dare you? How dare you?" she shot back. "You stand there on your high horse, judging me for surviving horror as a child, while you scheme to steal what my husband built through honest work." "Your husband married a whore," someone shouted from the back. The word hung in the air like a slap. Luke surged forward, but this time it was Jake who acted. His rifle suddenly aimed at the group. "That's enough," the old foreman said quietly. "You men have delivered your message. Time to go." "You'd stand with her," Hayes demanded. "I stand with decency. And right now, you boys are on the wrong side of it." Other ranch hands emerged from various buildings, all armed, all ready. Hayes looked around, calculating odds. "This isn't over. Mrs. McAllister, you can't run a ranch without the association's support." "Watch me," Elizabeth said. After they left, she sagged against the porch rail. Luke wrapped his arms around her, and she allowed herself a moment of weakness in his embrace. "They're right about one thing," she said. "Without contracts, without the association, we're in trouble. Then we find another way," Luke said firmly. "There are other markets, other towns." "Mr. Luke's right," Jake interrupted. "Pardon me for speaking plain, ma'am, but you've been running this place better than Mr. Thomas ever did. The hands that stayed, we're with you. We'll find a way." That evening, Elizabeth was surprised by another visitor, Mrs. Adelaide Morrison, the banker's wife. The elegant woman sat stiffly in the parlor, her face unreadable. "I suppose you've come to gloat," Elizabeth said. "Your husband must be thrilled by my current difficulties." "My husband is a fool," Adelaide said crisply, "and likely heading to federal prison, which serves him right." She paused, seeming to gather courage. "I came to thank you." Elizabeth blinked. "Thank me?" "For your courage in that church. You see, Mrs. McAllister, Elizabeth, I understand more than you might think about cages." Adelaide's composed mask cracked slightly. "My husband has controlled every aspect of my life for 20 years. Where I go, who I see, what I wear. I've been a perfectly respectable prisoner." "Mrs. Morrison." "Adelaide, please." She leaned forward. "When you stood up in that church and claimed your truth, something in me awakened. If you could survive what you did and stand tall, perhaps there's hope for the rest of us. What will you do?" "I have family in San Francisco. My sister's been begging me to visit for years. I think it's time I took her up on it." Adelaide stood. "I also wanted to give you this." She handed Elizabeth a leather portfolio. Inside were documents, contracts, agreements, correspondence. "My husband kept copies of everything. These are his dealings with the other ranchers, including plans to force you out and divide your land. There's also correspondence about your husband's death that might interest the federal marshal." Elizabeth's hands trembled. "Adelaide, this could send several men to prison." "Good." The older woman's smile was sharp. "Let them learn what it feels like to be caged." She moved to the door, then paused. "Oh, and Elizabeth? My cousin owns one of the largest cattle operations in California. I've already wired him about you. Expect a letter soon regarding contracts. Good evening." After she left, Elizabeth showed Luke the documents. His expression darkened as he read. "This proves Morrison ordered Thomas's death, and Hayes, Garrett, even Judge Thompson, they're all implicated in the conspiracy. We need to get this to Marshal Collins immediately. I'll write out at first light. Luke promised. This changes everything, Elizabeth." That night, unable to sleep, Elizabeth walked out to the small rise where she'd often seen Luke working. She found him there, sitting on a boulder, staring at the stars. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, settling beside him. "Thinking about the future?" He pulled her close. "With these documents, Morrison and his cronies will pay for what they've done. But you know there will still be those who judge you." "I know, but at least now I'm fighting as myself, not from behind a mask." "Elizabeth." He turned to face her fully. "I need to ask you something. When this settles, when the ranch is secure again, what then? What do you want?" "What do I want?" she considered. "I want to wake up without fear. I want to build something lasting here. I want to help other women who've been trapped like I was." She met his eyes. "And I want to do it all with you beside me. As your foreman, as my partner, my equal, She took a breath. "My husband, if you'll have me." Luke went very still. "Elizabeth, are you proposing to me?" "Would that scandalize you?" She smiled shakily. "I've already broken every other societal rule. The only thing that would scandalize me is if you took it back." He cupped her face. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. Though I should warn you, I've got nothing to offer but these 2 hands and a heart that's completely yours. That's everything I need." They kissed under the vast canopy of stars. sealing a promise born of shared pain and healing. The next weeks passed in a whirlwind. Marshal Collins arrested Hayes and several others based on Adelaide's documents. The conspiracy to murder Thomas and steal the ranch unraveled, sending shockwaves through the county. Some who'd shunned Elizabeth began to reconsider, shamed by how easily they'd been manipulated. Jesse returned briefly for Morrison's trial, his testimony helping seal the conviction. Before leaving again, he pulled Elizabeth aside. "You did it," he said. "You faced them all down and won. I had help. You had courage. The help just gave it direction." He glanced at Luke. "He's a good man. Thomas would approve. Thank you, Jesse, for everything. Just keep making him proud. Both of them." He tipped his hat and was gone, riding toward whatever adventure called him next. With the conspirators facing justice and Adelaide's cousin's contract secured, the ranch began to stabilize. Some townspeople remained cold, but others slowly warmed. The schoolteacher asked Elizabeth to speak to her older female students about strength and perseverance. Father Miguel invited her to help establish a fund for women in difficult circumstances. One evening, as Elizabeth worked on plans for expanding the ranch's operations, Luke found her in the study. "Letter came," he said, handing her an envelope. "From Kansas City." Her blood chilled. With trembling hands, she opened it. "Dear Elizabeth," she read aloud, "you may not remember me. My name is Dorothy Chen. I worked at the house on Vine Street after you left. I heard about your courage in telling your truth and wanted you to know. You gave me hope. If you could escape and build a new life, perhaps I could too. I'm writing from Chicago now, where I work as a seamstress. It's honest work, and I'm free. Thank you for showing it was possible. With gratitude, Dorothy." Elizabeth pressed the letter to her chest, tears flowing freely. Luke held her as she wept, not from sadness, but from a joy too profound for words. "You see," he murmured, "your courage ripples outward. You're saving others just by being yourself." A month later, on a crisp autumn morning, Elizabeth stood in the church where she'd revealed her past. This time, she wore a simple cream dress and carried wildflowers. Luke waited at the altar, Jake standing as his best man, Maria beaming from the front pew. The church was half empty. Many still couldn't accept her past. But those present were there by choice, not obligation. These were the people who saw her truly and loved her anyway. Father Miguel spoke of redemption, of love that transcends judgment, of the courage to build new lives from the ashes of old ones. When he asked if anyone objected, the silence was profound. "I do have something to say," Elizabeth announced, surprising everyone. She turned to face the small congregation. "I stand here not as the fallen woman some still see, nor as the tragic victim others prefer. I stand here as myself, flawed, scarred, but unbroken. I chose love over fear, truth over lies, hope over shame. And I pray that anyone here struggling with their own secrets finds the courage to do the same." "Amen," someone whispered, then louder, from others. "Amen." Luke took her hands, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You never cease to amaze me. Just wait," she whispered back. "I'm only getting started." They exchanged vows under the cross that had witnessed her confession and transformation. When Father Miguel pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was a seal on more than marriage. It was a promise of partnership between two souls who'd found home in each other. Outside, the autumn sun blessed them with warmth. Those who'd attended threw rice and offered genuine congratulations as they climbed into the wagon decorated with ribbons and flowers. Elizabeth caught sight of a familiar figure at the edge of town. Jesse sat on his horse, too far away to make out features, but unmistakably him. He raised his hat in salute, then turned and rode away, disappearing into the horizon like the romantic ghost he'd always been. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Callahan?" Luke asked. "I've been home since the day you arrived," she replied, "but yes, let's go build our future." As they drove back to the ranch, Elizabeth reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a frightened girl in Kansas City to a woman who'd claimed her truth before an entire town. From hidden shame to open love, the road ahead would have challenges. There would always be those who couldn't forgive her past. But she had Luke beside her, friends who'd proven their loyalty, and most importantly, she had herself, whole, honest, and free. The sun set behind them as they approached the ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Ahead, the lights of home beckoned, warm and welcoming. Elizabeth McAllister Callahan had finally stopped running, and in that stillness, she'd found everything she'd never dared dream of: love, purpose, and the unshakable knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. The decision to leave Cedar Falls hadn't come easily. For 6 months after their wedding, Elizabeth and Luke had fought to maintain the ranch against persistent hostility. While some townspeople had softened, others remained cruel in their righteousness. The final straw came when someone poisoned their water supply, killing a dozen cattle. "Enough," Elizabeth said that night, standing among the dead animals. "I won't let their hatred destroy what we're building." Luke pulled her close. "Where do you want to go?" "Somewhere we can start fresh. Where my past is just that, past." They sold the ranch to Adelaide's cousin, who promised to maintain it well. With the money from the sale and their savings, they had enough to start over anywhere. Jake, now too old for ranch work, accepted their offer of a pension. Maria decided to accompany them, declaring she wouldn't abandon her children to fend for themselves in strange territory. They headed north into Montana territory, where the land was still wild and judgments came second to survival. After weeks of travel, they found it, a sheltered valley with good water, surrounded by mountains that stood like protective sentinels. Elizabeth stood at the edge of what would become their new home, breathing air that tasted of pine and possibility. "Here," she said simply. Luke smiled. "Here." They filed their claim in the nearby settlement of Pine Ridge, a rough collection of buildings that could barely be called a town. The clerk barely glanced at Elizabeth, more interested in their filing fee than their history. Over the following months, they built their life from the ground up. A simple cabin first, then a barn, corrals, fences. Other settlers arrived, drawn by the promise of good land, and Elizabeth found herself part of a community too focused on survival to care about anyone's past. It was there, in that rough cabin with wind whistling through the chinks, that Elizabeth discovered she was pregnant. "You're sure?" Luke asked, his face a mixture of joy and concern. "Maria's delivered enough babies to know the signs," Elizabeth confirmed. "Come spring, we'll have a child." He knelt before her, pressing his face against her still flat stomach. "A child," he repeated in wonder. "Our child. Are you happy?" He looked up at her with tears in his eyes. "Elizabeth, you've given me everything I never dared dream of. And now this? I don't have words for what I feel." The winter was hard, with snow drifting higher than the windows and supplies running low. But their cabin became a gathering place for nearby settlers, sharing resources and company against the isolation. Elizabeth taught letters to children whose parents couldn't read. Luke helped neighbors with building and repairs. Slowly, without conscious effort, they became pillars of the small community. One frozen January night, a knock came at their door. Luke opened it cautiously, rifle in hand, to find a young woman barely out of her teens, lips blue with cold, clutching a small bundle. "Please," she gasped. "My baby." They brought her inside, Maria immediately taking charge. The woman, hardly more than a girl, was burning with fever. As Maria tended to her, she told her story in broken whispers. Sarah Hensley, aged 17, cast out by her family when she became pregnant without a husband. She'd been walking for days, trying to reach a cousin in Canada. "Rest now," Elizabeth soothed, remembering another desperate girl who'd once needed shelter. "You're safe here." Sarah survived the night, though her fever remained high. For 3 days. Elizabeth and Maria took turns nursing her while Luke cared for the baby, a tiny girl with her mother's dark hair. On the 4th day, Sarah's fever broke. She wept when she saw her daughter safe in Elizabeth's arms. "I thought God was punishing me," she sobbed. "For my sin, for giving in to a man who promised marriage then disappeared." Elizabeth sat on the bed beside her. "God doesn't punish frightened girls who make mistakes. People do that, but not here. Here, you're just Sarah, and she's just a baby who needs her mother. I have nowhere to go, no money, no family who'll take me." "Then stay," Elizabeth said simply. "We're building a new barn come spring. We'll need help. Can you work?" "I'll work harder than anyone," Sarah promised fiercely. Luke smiled from the doorway. "Then it's settled. Welcome to the Callahan homestead, Miss Sarah." Spring arrived with Elizabeth heavy with child and Sarah proving herself invaluable around the homestead. The baby, whom Sarah had named Hope, thrived in the care of their makeshift family. It was on a warm May morning that Elizabeth's pains began. Maria took charge, banishing Luke to pace the porch with Sarah for company. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and as the sun set, a new cry joined the sounds of the evening. "A son," Maria announced, placing the baby in Elizabeth's arms. "Healthy and loud, just like his father." Luke entered tentatively, his face soft with awe as he gazed at their child. "He's perfect. What shall we call him?" Elizabeth asked. "Thomas," Luke said without hesitation. "Thomas James Callahan, for the man who saved you, and my father who would have loved you." "Thomas," Elizabeth agreed, tears slipping down her cheeks. The summer passed in a blur of feedings and diapers, Sarah helping with an efficiency born of her own experience. The homestead prospered, their small herd growing, gardens flourishing. Word spread of the Callahan place where no questions were asked and help was freely given. It was August when Jesse appeared again, riding in at sunset like a figure from a dream. He looked older, a new scar across his cheek, but his smile remained unchanged. "Heard you'd relocated," he said, swinging down from his horse. "Thought I'd check on my favorite former widow." Elizabeth embraced him warmly. "How did you find us?" "I have my ways. Besides, you're becoming famous in certain circles. The woman who helps other women start over." He studied the homestead appreciatively. "You've done well." "We've been blessed," Elizabeth said, then called out, "Luke, we have a visitor." The reunion was warm, Jesse admiring baby Thomas and charming Sarah with his stories. After dinner, as they sat on the porch watching stars appear, Jesse grew serious. "I actually came with a purpose beyond social calling," he admitted. "There's a situation in Denver, a house similar to the one you knew in Kansas City. Some of the girls want out but have nowhere to go." Elizabeth's blood chilled. "How many?" "6, maybe 7. Young ones, mostly. The madam's not cruel, but she's not letting them leave without their debts paid either." "What do you need from us?" "Not from you," Jesse said carefully. "I know some people who could help with the rescue, but they need somewhere to send the girls after. Somewhere they could heal, learn new skills, start over." Elizabeth looked at Luke, saw her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. "We'd need to build more cabins," Luke said practically. "Maybe a larger common building for meals and teaching." "The neighbors might not appreciate," Jesse began. "The neighbors include a former saloon girl, a drunk who found sobriety, and at least 2 men running from pasts they don't discuss." Elizabeth interrupted. "Pine Ridge isn't Cedar Falls. People here understand second chances." "So you'll do it?" "Give us 2 months to prepare," Elizabeth said. "Then send them home." Jesse's smile was brilliant. "I knew I could count on you." The next weeks were a whirlwind of building and planning. When Elizabeth explained their project to the community, the response surprised her. The blacksmith offered to help with construction. The minister's wife volunteered to teach sewing. Even crusty old Murphy, who ran the general store, gruffly offered a discount on supplies for them poor girls. "It's different here," Sarah marveled one evening as they planned sleeping arrangements. "People actually want to help. Maybe because so many of them are running from something too," Elizabeth reflected. "It's easier to offer grace when you've needed it yourself." The first group arrived on a cold October morning. 5 young women ranging from 15 to 20, eyes hollow with experiences that had aged them beyond their years. Elizabeth stood on the porch, Thomas on her hip, watching their approach. "Welcome," she said simply. "I'm Elizabeth. I've been where you are. Now I'm here. And someday, you'll be somewhere better too." The youngest, a girl named Ruth, who couldn't have been more than 15, burst into tears. "Is it real? Are we really safe?" "You're safe," Elizabeth promised, "and you're home for as long as you need." The transformation wasn't instant or easy. There were nightmares, tears, moments of despair when the girls couldn't believe they deserved redemption. But slowly, with patience and love, they began to heal. Elizabeth taught them to read and write. Luke and the neighboring men taught them ranch skills. Maria showed them cooking and household management. Sarah, closest to their age and experience, became their confidant and proof that new lives were possible. Winter arrived early that year, but the expanded homestead felt warm with purpose. The main house had grown to include a large common room where meals were shared and lessons taught. 3 new cabins housed the girls, with Sarah and Hope in a 4th. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, Elizabeth sat by the fire nursing Thomas while the girls worked on their letters. Ruth approached hesitantly. "Mrs. Elizabeth, I've been thinking. When I leave here, I want to be a teacher. Do you think, could someone like me do that?" Elizabeth shifted Thomas to look at Ruth directly. "Someone like you? You mean someone who's survived hardship and come out stronger? Someone who knows the value of education because she was denied it? Someone with empathy for others' struggles? I think you'd make an excellent teacher." Ruth's face lit up with possibility. Christmas brought unexpected joy when 2 of the girls received marriage proposals from local settlers. Good men who saw them as they were now, not who they'd been. Elizabeth counseled them carefully, ensuring they chose freely, not from desperation or gratitude. "You don't have to marry to be safe," she reminded them. "You have options now. Choose with your heart, not your fear." Both chose to marry. Their wedding simple affairs that brought the whole community together, watching them dance with their new husbands. Elizabeth felt Luke's arms circle her from behind. "You did this," he murmured, gave them hope. "We did this," she corrected. "All of us, together." By spring, 2 more groups had arrived, and the Callahan homestead had become known throughout the territory as a place of refuge and renewal. Letters came from girls who'd moved on, telling of new lives as seamstresses, teachers, wives, mothers. Each success story fueled Elizabeth's determination to help more. One warm April morning, as Elizabeth worked in the garden with Thomas toddling nearby, a familiar figure appeared on the road. Her heart stopped. Adelaide Morrison, looking years younger than when they'd last met, climbed down from a modest wagon. "Elizabeth, I hope you don't mind. I've come to stay, if you'll have me." "Adelaide, of course. But why?" "Because what you're doing here is important. And because I spent 20 years as a different kind of prisoner, I want to help others find the freedom you helped me discover. But the society life in San Francisco is as empty as the one I left in Cedar Falls." Adelaide's smile was radiant. "I want to do something that matters. Teach me, Elizabeth. Let me help." That night, as they all gathered for dinner, former prostitutes, abandoned mothers, society ladies, cowboys, and children, Elizabeth looked around the table with a full heart. This was what she'd been meant to build. Not just a ranch or a refuge, but a family bound by shared understanding and mutual grace. Luke raised his glass. "To second chances, to second chances," they echoed, voices blending in harmony. Outside, the Montana mountains stood eternal guard, protecting this small valley where broken people came to become whole, where past sins were forgiven and futures were built on hope rather than fear. Elizabeth caught Jesse's eye across the table. He'd arrived that morning with news of more girls needing help. He winked, and she smiled back. The work would continue. The refuge would grow. And somewhere out there, a desperate girl would hear whispers of a place where women like her could start over. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new faces, new stories of pain and redemption. But tonight, surrounded by chosen family in the home built on love and courage, Elizabeth Callahan finally understood what it meant to be truly free. The candles flickered in the evening breeze, casting dancing shadows on faces marked by hardship but softened by hope. In her arms, Thomas reached for his father, and Luke took him with practiced ease. Sarah laughed at something one of the girls said. Maria hummed while serving dessert. Adelaide listened intently to Ruth's teaching plans. This was redemption. Not just hers, but all of theirs, woven together into something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the power of grace and the strength found in lifting others. Elizabeth had once been a frightened girl in a Kansas City brothel. Now she was a mother, wife, teacher, and beacon of hope for those still lost in darkness. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led her here, to this moment, this place, these people, and it was good. The years in Montana had been good to them. 5 harvests, dozens of women helped, a community built on mutual respect. But Luke could see the toll it was taking on Elizabeth. Running the refuge while raising Thomas, now 5 and full of questions, was wearing her thin. The decision to return to Cedar Falls hadn't been made lightly. "Are you certain?" Adelaide asked as they packed. She'd become Elizabeth's right hand, taking over much of the refuge's daily operations. "After how they treated you." "I received a letter," Elizabeth explained, showing her the worn paper. "From Father Miguel. Things have changed. Many who condemned me have moved on or reconsidered. He thinks it's time." Luke understood. The McAllister Ranch, now the Byron Ranch under Adelaide's cousin's management, still held Thomas's grave. Elizabeth had never properly said goodbye, driven out too quickly by hate and circumstance. "Besides," Elizabeth added, bouncing young Thomas on her knee, "our son deserves to see where his parents' story began." They left the refuge in Adelaide's capable hands, along with Sarah, who'd grown into a formidable manager herself. The journey south took 3 weeks, each mile bringing more memories. Luke watched Elizabeth grow both more tense and more resolved. Cedar Falls appeared on a crisp autumn morning, smaller than memory suggested. The buildings looked weathered. Some businesses changed hands, but the bones remained the same. The church steeple still reached toward heaven, the main street still dusty and wide. Their arrival didn't go unnoticed. People stopped and stared as their wagon rolled down Main Street. Some faces showed recognition, others confusion at the well-dressed family with the small boy. They took rooms at the hotel, the same one where Jessie had once stayed. The proprietor, Mrs. Daniels, went pale when she recognized Elizabeth. "Mrs. McAllister? Mrs. Callahan. We heard you'd gone north." "We did. Now we're visiting." Elizabeth's voice was calm, steady. "Is that a problem?" "No, ma'am. No problem at all." The woman's eyes dropped. I owe you an apology." "For how I acted before. I was wrong." "Thank you," Elizabeth said simply. "Room for 3, please, and stable space for our horses." Word spread quickly. Within hours, the whole town knew Elizabeth Callahan had returned. Some visitors came to the hotel. Maria, tears streaming as she embraced her former mistress. Jake, older and bent, but beaming with pride. Even Mrs. Henderson, who'd pulled their cattle contract years ago. "I was a fool," Henderson said plainly. "Let fear and prejudice guide me instead of the evidence of my own eyes. You were always honest in your dealings. I'm sorry." That evening, Father Miguel visited. The priest had aged, his hair now fully silver, but his eyes remained kind. "Elizabeth, Luke, welcome home." He admired young Thomas, who was building blocks on the floor. A fine boy. His namesake would be proud. "How have things really been, Father?" Elizabeth asked. "Your letter painted a rosy picture, but change comes slowly," he admitted. But Morrison's trial opened many eyes. People realized how easily they'd been manipulated, how quick they were to judge. Some left in shame, Others stayed and tried to do better. And our return will be the test of that better intention. He smiled gently. Tomorrow is Sunday. Will you come to service? Elizabeth looked at Luke, who nodded. We'll be there. The next morning, they dressed carefully, Elizabeth in a deep blue dress that emphasized her maturity and status, Luke in his best suit, Thomas in a miniature version of his father's outfit. They walked to church as a family, heads high, hands linked. The congregation's reaction was immediate. Conversation stopped. Everyone turned to stare. But this time, Elizabeth noticed, not all the looks were hostile. Some held curiosity, others shame, a few even welcome. They took a pew near the middle, not hiding in back, not pushing to front, a statement of belonging without aggression. Thomas, unused to such formality, fidgeted until Luke distracted him with a carved wooden horse. The service began normally, but Elizabeth could feel the tension. When Father Miguel called for community prayers, an elderly woman stood, Mrs. Clayton, who'd been one of the most vocal in condemning Elizabeth years ago. I have something to say, Mrs. Clayton announced, voice shaking. 6 years ago, a woman stood in this church and told her truth, and I, in my prideful righteousness, was among the first to condemn her. I was wrong. She turned to face Elizabeth directly. Mrs. Callahan, I've learned since then that my own granddaughter faced similar circumstances. If not for the refuge you created, she might have, well, she's a teacher now in Billings, thanks to the chance you gave her. I'm sorry for my cruelty, and I'm grateful beyond words for your compassion. She sat down heavily. A murmur ran through the congregation. Then another person stood, Robert Garrett, the merchant. I too owe an apology, he said. I let greed and prejudice guide me. Mrs. Callahan, you conducted business fairly and honestly. I was wrong to shun you. One by one, others stood. Not everyone. Some sat rigid with disapproval. But enough. Enough to show that the town had indeed changed, learned, grown. Father Miguel raised his hand for silence. The Lord teaches us that he who is without sin should cast the first stone. 6 years ago, we forgot that teaching. Today, we remember. Elizabeth and Luke Callahan, welcome home. After the service, they visited Thomas Byron's grave. Elizabeth knelt by the stone, one hand on the earth, the other holding her son. Thomas, she said softly. Meet Thomas. He has your kindness, I think, and Luke's strength. He asks so many questions about you, about how you saved me. Her voice broke slightly. I hope I've made you proud. I hope I've honored what you gave me. Luke's hand settled on her shoulder, warm and supportive. Young Thomas, sensing the moment's importance, stood quietly by his mother's side. He'd be proud, Luke said. You took his gift and multiplied it, saved others as he saved you. A man couldn't ask for a better legacy. They stayed in Cedar Falls for a week, each day bringing new reconciliations and revelations. The current ranch owner invited them to visit, and Elizabeth walked the familiar paths with bittersweet nostalgia. The house where she'd hidden her shame now stood open and welcoming, filled with another family's laughter. On their last evening, they held a gathering at the hotel. Those who'd stood by them, those who'd found courage to apologize, and those curious about their work up north all came. Elizabeth spoke about the refuge, about the women they'd helped, about the power of second chances. Cedar Falls gave me my first second chance when Thomas brought me here, she said. It gave me my second when Luke arrived. Even the pain of leaving led to something beautiful, a place where other women could find what I found. Redemption isn't a single moment. It's a journey we take together. Young Ruth, now Ruth Patterson, married and teaching at the local school, stood up. Mrs. Callahan saved my life, not just by taking me in, but by showing me I was worth saving. There are 23 of us now, living new lives because she dared to see us as more than our worst moments. The room fell silent. Absorbing this truth, Elizabeth noticed several people wiping away tears. As the evening wound down, Jesse appeared, because of course he did, always materializing when the moment was right. He swept Thomas up in his arms, making the boy giggle. "Heading back north tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes, the refuge needs us," Elizabeth confirmed. "Will you visit soon?" "Already planning on it. Got word of a situation in Cheyenne." His expression sobered. "Elizabeth, what you've built, it matters. Don't ever doubt that." Their final morning in Cedar Falls dawned clear and bright. As they loaded their wagon, a small crowd gathered. Some came to say farewell. Others pressed donations into Elizabeth's hands. For them girls up north, the hotel owner refused payment for their stay. As they drove out of town, Luke noticed Elizabeth wasn't looking back. "No regrets?" "No," she said, surprising herself with the truth. "I needed to come back, to see that the past no longer has power over me, but our life, our work, is ahead, not behind." "Mama," Thomas piped up from between them. Why were those people sad? Elizabeth considered how to explain. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people make mistakes. They hurt others because they're afraid or don't understand. Those people were sad about mistakes they made." "Did they say sorry?" "Yes, they did." "Then it's okay, right? When you say sorry and mean it." From the mouths of babes, Elizabeth thought. "Yes, my love. Then it's okay." The journey home to Montana felt different, lighter somehow. Elizabeth realized she'd been carrying Cedar Falls with her all these years, a weight of judgment and rejection. Now she could let it go, keep only the good memories and lessons learned. They stopped at the spot where they'd first seen their valley 5 years ago. It spread before them now, dotted with buildings, gardens, smoke rising from multiple chimneys. "Home. Look," Luke pointed. "Sarah's hung out the welcome flag." Indeed, a bright banner flew from the main house, their signal that all was well and they were expected. As they descended into the valley, figures emerged from buildings, the current residents, the staff, all gathering to welcome them back. "It's bigger," Elizabeth breathed. 2 new cabins had been built in their absence. Adelaide met them at the main house, smiling broadly. "We had new arrivals while you were gone. Sisters from Denver. Jessie sent them. I hope you don't mind, but we couldn't turn them away." "Of course not." Elizabeth hugged her friend. "How did you manage?" "The same way you taught me. One day, one woman, one act of grace at a time." That evening, as the extended family gathered for dinner, Elizabeth shared stories of Cedar Falls. The women listened intently, some recognizing their own experiences in the tale of judgment and redemption. "Will we ever go back?" one of the newer girls asked nervously. "Some of you might," Elizabeth said honestly. "To visit, to show how far you've come, maybe even to help others, but only when you're ready, only when the past is truly past." "How do you know when that is?" Elizabeth looked around the table, at Luke, steady and loving, at Thomas, innocent and bright, at Adelaide and Sarah, partners in this work, at Maria, faithful through everything, at the dozen women in various stages of healing and growth. "When you can tell your story without shame," she said. "When you see your scars as proof of survival, not marks of ruin. When you know, deep in your bones, that you are worthy of love and respect regardless of what came before." "Are you there?" the girl asked. "At that place." Elizabeth reached for Luke's hand under the table. "Yes, finally. Yes." Later, after the dishes were done and the house had settled into nighttime quiet, Elizabeth and Luke sat on their porch, watching stars appear over the mountains. Thomas played at their feet with the wooden horse, making up adventures. "She's blossomed," Luke observed, referring to Sarah, who'd spent the evening teaching the newer girls to read. Hard to remember the half-frozen child who showed up that winter night. "They all blossom, given chance and care." Elizabeth leaned into his warmth. "Even us tattered souls from Cedar Falls. Especially us." He kissed her temple. "What now? We've faced your past, built this place, helped so many. What's next?" "More of the same, I hope. There are always more who need help, and Thomas will need siblings. This place should echo with children's laughter." Siblings? Luke's voice held pleased surprise. If God wills it, this valley has room for all kinds of families. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, horses settling, a distant coyote, the whisper of wind through pines. The stars wheeled overhead, infinite and eternal. I used to think redemption meant erasing the past, Elizabeth said eventually. Now I know it means transforming it, taking the pain and making it purposeful. Like Jesse always says, everyone's running from something out here. The lucky ones find something to run toward. Are we lucky? Luke pulled her closer. The luckiest? Thomas climbed into Elizabeth's lap, yawning hugely. Mama, will you tell the story? Which story, my love? About the lady who was sad, then brave, then happy. Elizabeth smiled, recognizing her own tale in his simple words. Once upon a time, there was a lady who thought she was broken. As she spun the story, carefully edited for young ears, Elizabeth marveled at the journey. From shame to acceptance, from isolation to community, from fear to love. The refuge would continue growing. More women would find their way to healing. Her son would grow up seeing strength in those society dismissed. And somewhere out there, a desperate girl was hearing whispers of a place in the Montana mountains where the broken came to be mended, where the past didn't define the future, where women like her could find their way home. The story continued, would always continue, as long as there were those who needed shelter and those willing to provide it. Elizabeth Callahan had found her purpose, her place, her peace, under the vast Montana sky, surrounded by chosen family. She was finally, fully, free. 1 year after their return from Cedar Falls, the Callahan Refuge had grown into something neither Elizabeth nor Luke could have imagined. 23 women currently called it home, along with 8 children. The valley rang with life, laughter, tears, arguments, reconciliations, all the messy beauty of humans healing together. Elizabeth stood in the doorway of the newest building, a proper schoolhouse, watching Ruth Patterson teach. Ruth had returned to them 6 months ago, leaving her teaching position in Cedar Falls with her husband's blessing to help expand the refuge's educational mission. Sometimes going back is just a different way of moving forward. Ruth had explained, "You gave me a chance. Now I want to give others the same." The morning lessons were interrupted by the sound of approaching wagons. Many wagons. Elizabeth stepped onto the porch, shading her eyes against the spring sun. A convoy of 5 wagons wound its way into the valley, escorted by several riders, including, her heart lifted, Jessie. But it was the lead wagon that made her gasp. Adelaide sat at the reins, and beside her, dignified despite the dust of travel, sat Margaret Standish, one of Denver's most prominent society matrons. "Elizabeth," Adelaide called out as they pulled up, "I hope you have room. We've brought you something of a challenge." As the wagons emptied, Elizabeth understood. These weren't just desperate girls from brothels. These were women of various ages and circumstances, some young, some older, some well-dressed, others in working clothes. Margaret Standish approached, her bearing regal despite obvious exhaustion. "Mrs. Callahan, I've heard so much about your work here. I need your help." "Of course, but I'm surprised that someone like me would need refuge." Margaret's laugh was bitter. "My husband discovered I've been helping fallen women in Denver. He's divorcing me, taking everything, including my children. In society's eyes, I'm as ruined as any woman who sold herself. Perhaps more so, because I fell from greater heights." Elizabeth embraced her without hesitation. "Then you understand perfectly why our work matters. Welcome home." The new arrivals included 2 Chinese women who'd escaped from a house in San Francisco, a young widow whose in-laws had thrown her out, a schoolteacher dismissed for refusing her employer's advances, and several others with stories that proved vulnerability crossed all social lines. That evening, as they worked to settle everyone, Luke pulled Elizabeth aside. "We're running out of room. I know. We'll need to build again. Or," he gestured toward the eastern meadow, What if we didn't just build more cabins? What if we built a real town? Elizabeth stared at him. A town? Think about it. We have teachers, seamstresses, cooks, even a nurse now. Why not create a place where women don't just heal but build new lives permanently? Where they can own businesses, homes, futures. The audacity of it stole her breath. But as she looked around at the community they'd already built, she saw the possibility. We'd need legal structure, recognition. Jesse's been looking into it. Says with Montana moving toward statehood, new towns are being incorporated regularly. We have enough people, enough infrastructure. That night, Elizabeth called a community meeting. The main hall filled with women whose eyes held hard-won wisdom. Children who'd learned resilience too young, and the few men like Luke and visiting Jesse who'd proven themselves true allies. We started this as a refuge. Elizabeth began. A place to heal and move on. But what if we could be more? What if we created a town where women's full citizenship isn't questioned? Where our children grow up seeing strength in all its forms? The discussion went late into the night. There were concerns, legal challenges, funding needs, potential opposition. But there was also hope, burning brighter with each shared idea. Margaret Standish, her society polish intact despite her circumstances, offered unexpected expertise. I know lawyers sympathetic to our cause, and there are women of means who would invest in such a venture. Women tired of being ornamental in their husbands' worlds. I could run a restaurant, Maria suggested. Teach cooking to girls who need trade skills. A boarding house, another woman added. For travelers, but also for women needing temporary shelter. A newspaper, Ruth said firmly. To tell our stories ourselves instead of letting others define us. By dawn, they had the framework of a plan. The town would be called Liberty Valley, a place where freedom meant more than just physical safety. The next months were a whirlwind of legal filings, construction, and organization. Jesse proved invaluable. Using his connections to smooth bureaucratic paths, Margaret's society contacts, scandalized but intrigued, provided funding. Women who'd found success after leaving the refuge returned to help, bringing skills and resources. The opposition came. As expected, a group of ranchers from neighboring territories filed complaints, claiming a town of fallen women would corrupt the region. The territorial governor received pressure to deny their incorporation. It was then that unexpected allies emerged. Father Miguel arrived from Cedar Falls with a petition signed by 200 citizens supporting Liberty Valley. The minister from Pine Ridge brought his own congregation's endorsement. Even Adelaide's cousin, the successful rancher, lent his influential voice to their cause. The hearing was held in Helena on a crisp October day. Elizabeth dressed carefully, not hiding who she was, but presenting herself with dignity. Luke stood beside her, Thomas holding his hand. The hall filled with their supporters, women who'd rebuilt their lives, men who'd learned to see beyond prejudice, children who knew no shame in their mothers' pasts. The opposition spoke first, painting lurid pictures of moral decay and social collapse. Then Elizabeth rose to respond. Gentlemen, she began, addressing the territorial commissioners. You speak of morality. Let me tell you about morality. It's the Chinese woman who tends your sick despite the names you call her. It's the former prostitute who teaches your children to read because she knows the prison of ignorance. It's the society lady who gives up everything to help others, knowing she'll be cast out for her compassion. She looked around the room, meeting hostile eyes without flinching. You fear us because we survived what should have destroyed us, because we dare to build instead of beg, because we refuse to disappear into shame and silence. Liberty Valley already exists. She continued. We've been governing ourselves for 2 years, maintaining order, conducting business, educating children. We're not asking permission to be worthy. We're demonstrating that we already are. The only question is whether Montana will be progressive enough to recognize it. The commissioners deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the chairman, an elderly man with kind eyes, stood to deliver the verdict. The territory of Montana hereby recognizes the incorporated town of Liberty Valley, May it serve as a beacon of what's possible when we judge people by their actions rather than their circumstances. The celebration lasted days. As the first snows began to fall, Liberty Valley buzzed with activity. New buildings rose: Margaret's boarding house, Maria's restaurant, Ruth's school expanding into a proper academy, the newspaper, edited by a former prostitute who discovered a gift for words, published its first edition. Luke was elected the first mayor, despite his protests. Elizabeth founded the Liberty Valley Women's Council, ensuring women's voices would be central to governance. Thomas and the other children attended school where their mothers' pasts were history lessons in resilience, not sources of shame. Jesse visited for the official town founding, bringing news from across the West. "You've started something," he told Elizabeth. "Other places are taking notice. There's talk of similar communities in Colorado, California. You've proven it can work. We've proven women can save themselves if given the chance," Elizabeth corrected. Winter settled over Liberty Valley like a benediction. The town hummed with industry, women running businesses, teaching trades, living full lives. Former enemies became neighbors. Children played without knowledge of the divisions that had once seemed insurmountable. On Christmas Eve, the whole town gathered in the meeting hall. Elizabeth stood before them, Luke and Thomas beside her, new life stirring in her womb, the sibling Thomas had been promised. "7 years ago," she began, "I stood in a different church and spoke my truth to people who mostly didn't want to hear it. I was terrified, certain I was ending my life as I knew it. I was right, that life did end, and from its ashes, all this grew." She gestured to the assembled crowd, former prostitutes and society ladies, Chinese immigrants and Eastern school teachers, children born of trauma and children born of joy. All citizens of a town that shouldn't exist, but did. Every person here has a story of loss, of judgment, of falling. But look what we've built from those broken pieces. Look what becomes possible when we stop letting shame define us. Margaret Standish started the singing, a hymn of hope that filled the hall. Voices joined, harmonizing despite different accents and backgrounds. Outside, snow fell on Liberty Valley, blanketing the town in pristine white, covering all tracks but the ones leading forward. Later, as families dispersed to their homes, real homes, owned and earned. Elizabeth stood with Luke on their porch. Thomas slept in Luke's arms. Worn out from excitement, the town spread before them, windows glowing with warmth and welcome. "Did you imagine this?" Luke asked softly. "When you were that scared girl in Kansas City, did you ever dream something like this was possible?" "Never," Elizabeth admitted. "I couldn't imagine surviving the next day, much less building a future. But maybe that's the point. We can't see the end from the beginning. We can only take the next step, then the next, until we look back and realize how far we've come." "And the next step?" Elizabeth placed his hand on her growing belly. "Raising children who never know shame for existing. Building a town where every woman owns her own story. Proving that redemption isn't just personal, it's communal." A wolf howled in the distant mountains, but it sounded like freedom rather than threat. Liberty Valley answered with the sounds of life, a baby crying, quickly soothed, laughter from Maria's restaurant, the newspaper press running late into the night, prayers in multiple languages rising from various homes. "You know what I think?" Luke said, pulling her close. "I think Thomas Byron knew exactly what he was doing when he married you, not saving you, giving you the chance to save yourself and then others. He'd be so proud. They all would." Elizabeth agreed, thinking of everyone who'd played a part. Thomas, Jesse, Father Miguel, Adelaide, even the opposition that had forced her to find her strength. "Every person who showed us cruelty taught us compassion. Everyone who showed us kindness taught us to pass it on." As they went inside, Elizabeth paused at the door, looking back once more at the town, her town, their town, everyone's town who needed it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new arrivals seeking hope, new battles for recognition and respect. But tonight, Liberty Valley stood as proof that the broken could rebuild, the fallen could rise, and the rejected could create their own place of belonging. In a harsh land that tested every soul, they had carved out a space where grace grew wild and second chances bloomed like prairie flowers after rain. The candle in their window joined dozens of others, beacons in the darkness, proclaiming to all who needed to hear, "Here is sanctuary. Here is hope. Here is home." Elizabeth closed the door against the cold, gathered her family close, and began planning tomorrow's miracles. In Liberty Valley, they were always possible. The story of the widow who hid her past had become the story of a woman who transformed it into purpose. And in that transformation, she had created a legacy that would outlive them all. A place where every woman's story mattered, where every child could grow unburdened by their parents' pain, where love conquered judgment and community trumped condemnation. Under the vast Montana sky, cradled by mountains that had witnessed every human drama, Liberty Valley slept peacefully. And Elizabeth Callahan, once lost but now found, smiled as she felt her baby kick. Another life that would know only freedom, another soul that would never question its worth. The past was past, the future stretched bright, and in this present moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Thank you so much for joining me on this emotional journey through the Wild West. I hope Elizabeth's story of resilience, redemption, and the power of second chances touched your heart as much as it did mine. Where are you listening to this story from? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to connect with listeners from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more authentic Western tales that explore the human spirit against the backdrop of America's frontier. What did you think of Elizabeth's journey? Share your thoughts below.